to these results, and we ought to resolve these claims, not just dismiss them out of hand.
What kind of pressure are you facing right now? We know that Mitch McConnell does not want any objection. We also know that Liz Cheney is telling her colleagues, why are we doing this? This is a waste of time. Don't do it. We shouldn't be putting ourselves out there. We also heard from Senator Klobuchar. She said, get a grip. Lisa Murkowski said we should not be doing this. And you know that you will require both the House and the Senate to reject the electors from a number of states in order to be successful. That's likely not happening, that you're going to win in both the House and the Senate. And what if a commission does find fraud? What happens then? Mm-hmm.
Well, listen, I think everyone needs to calm down. I think we need to tone down the rhetoric. This is already a volatile situation. It's like a tinderbox and throwing lit matches into it. And so I think the kind of hyperbole we're seeing, the kind of angry language, yesterday when I released my statement with 10 other senators, I had multiple Democrats urging that I should be arrested and tried for the crimes of sedition and treason. Now, look, that's not helpful. At a time when this country, when we're pitted against each other, just relax and let's do our jobs. We have a responsibility to follow the law. And let me say, by the way, to those members who may not have a concern about this election, whether you're a Democrat or even some Republicans, the poll numbers you covered at the top of the show, I think ought to be deeply troubling to everyone. 39% of Americans think, quote, the election was rigged. And that includes 17% of Democrats, 31% of independents. That's bad for our democracy. That's bad for the legitimacy of any subsequent presidential elections. And so dismissing these claims, I think, does real violence to our democratic system. We ought to have a serious, fair process and tribunal to consider these claims, consider them quickly, consider them expeditiously. We can do it in 10 days before the inauguration. I think that would take major steps towards reestablishing trust in our democratic process. And I believe that should be a bipartisan objective. We may be too divided today for that to happen, but Democrats should be interested in Americans having confidence in our electoral system just as much as Republicans should be.
Yeah. Senator, you are an expert on the Constitution. You are a constitutionalist. You wrote an entire book about it. What does the Constitution tell us about who decides who the president should be? What if the commission that you are explaining does form, comes back with actual evidence of fraud? Then what happens?
Well, then the results have to be set aside. If there's evidence of fraud and it's substantial and significant enough to affect the results in a particular state, then those election results would have to be set aside. And the states would then have to determine, all right, we have a valid claim here. The evidence supports it. We need to conduct elections consistent with the law. The Constitution gives the responsibility of counting the ballots to the Vice President of the United States, Vice President Mike Pence, and to both houses of Congress. And the framers of the Constitution, when they assigned a task to the Congress, they knew what they were doing. There's some folks who are saying this is purely a ministerial act. They just have to, count them and walk out and you have no judgment whatsoever. Well, that frankly doesn't make any sense. Why would the framers give to Congress something that could be given to a clerk? The reason they gave it to Congress is they understood there are difficult determinations about what counts as a valid vote. Following the 1876 election, 10 years later, in 1887, Congress passed a statute, the statute that we're operating under. It's called the Electoral Count Act. And what it provides is the mechanism for raising an objection. And it says you can raise an objection if the votes were not regularly made by lawfully certified electors. And so in this instance, if you have states that are violating the law, that are committing fraud, those votes are not being regularly made, and those are not lawfully certified electors. And so that Congress's responsibility is to address these claims. I understand that for some of my colleagues, that's a hard choice. It's not a responsibility they welcome. Whether we welcome it or not, the Constitution gives us that responsibility, and we need to step forward and defend the rule of law and protect the integrity of our elections.
Real quick as we wrap up, Senator,